Welcome back to another session of Python Medias. I have news for you. Your code will crash. Not good? True. But this is something which every programmer should handle right from the beginning. So take a look at your code and understand what could potentially happen. Now let's just deal with it, right? So our story is how do you deal with something when it goes wrong? And that's the reality of programming in any case. Because the scenarios outside of the code are not controlled by the code. So let's look at certain specifics in Python. Here we are looking at this particular code. I'm going to run this for once and see the output here. We have got a variable called noval and it's got a value none. It's a none type. Once you have the none type on this, it printed none. Then we have a condition from earlier. You remember the if condition. If noval, we said is, we didn't say equal to. We said is none. So that's a way of checking if it is none. And then it printed the value of that, right? So in this case, it will say noval variable it has a single colon, that is colon, and the value of which is none. Now in the next scenario, I put a string here. It's in double quotes. It's not outside the quotes. None is specific to Python. It's a nuance of Python. In this particular case, it prints out none. It's this two look just the same, correct? They look just the same. Then it says not none because this condition was not met, right? And this time we have a double colon to distinguish the output here. So this double colon did not appear. So what do you see here? Not none. That is true. Now let's also distinguish this empty string from this and this. Now in this case, it has got absolutely nothing. Though it printed this, it just looks at it this way, right? So let's just distinguish between these three different scenarios. Now in a scenario, there are things which happen. For example, you are accepting the input from a user and then dividing it, right? So let's say this 0 was a placeholder for that. And what would happen? Obviously, division by 0, not a good thing. So that problem occurred. Now let's assume this is going to be the problem that we are trying to handle. But before we go there is this sweet feature here. It says explainer. This is your Google Gemini feature. The Google Gemini helps you understand what that is. Right? One way, like a programmer, like we said in the initial stages, the programmer can check it. The other way is to handle the exception and say something wrong went happen. Right? So here, your exception handling, this is new to you. Like your if condition, there's a nesting. The exception also, code block, has a nesting. The rule of thumb is if you see a colon coming, whatever comes after the colon should typically be nested. That's your rule of thumb for Python. Right, so here we handled it, but we don't know what is the exception, except for the fact that we ran it and we know it's this one. So if you want, so I want to log it when you're trying to run your program, you want to debug it, and you want to understand what really happened with the particular issue. The one way is to get hold of this and display it somewhere or look at it in your debugger. We are not talked about debugger yet, so let's not talk about that. We're just going to print it. So it says division by 0, right? It says 0 division error. We'll distinguish these two. They are pretty much the same yet different. Now here we have got a variable which has got the value of that. Again, we use string function to convert that into a string to display it like we did before here. The value was converted to a string, right? To handle none and whatever else. Here, really, you don't require to convert this to string, but you could still convert it. No harm done. But this is superfluous. So, doesn't hurt the code in terms of working. It hurts the code in terms of performance. Not for now. Let's talk about that later. Let's focus on the code. So now that we got hold of something which can give you further details of this one, it told us, like it is here. Let's just run this. It is an exception occurred, right? Now let's just go back in this one and run this piece. Look at this piece. It says division by 0. So, and we knew it is division by 0 by this piece of code, right? Now, how do you handle it? You look at the manual for Python. You know the exception is this, or you can simply try this to get hold of that and handle specific exceptions first. But if you are not too sure what the exception is, or you do not have time for now for doing your assignment or completing the project may be a slightly different story, but let's not bother about that for now. The good practice is to look at division by 0 first and then this later, because this is a generic exception. Even if you don't handle division by 0, it would have come here, right? Like this case. But here, the more specific exception gets triggered first. So you can have more specific handling, and more specific information can go to the user who's using the application. So in this session, we looked at what was none, how the quoted none is different from the single quote and the none. We looked at the try except without the exception clause. We looked at the try except with the exception clause. We looked at the try except with specific exceptions, that is handling it at the level of a more specific exception first. We saw how to detect the class of the exception. You can look at the manual or just pretty much run it, let it die and then do it. Not smart, but this in a small scenario like this, it would still do you some good. And like we said, there are many ways of handling it. Ideally, a programmer can handle it. And the Gemini tool, which you're seeing on your right hand side, this star pattern is your AI assistant encoding in inside your Google Colab, and this will help you understand certain things, or you can ask it questions like you do with ChatGPT. It is the assistant which Google provides you. So you are pretty much in the zone of programming with an assistant right by your side. As you're getting to more complex code, you can use Gemini here to give you some kind of a help to understand how it works. Now, this may not be available in your region, but most likely is, because there are certain restrictions to what can be exported by a company outside of the US or not. Google being an American company, it may not be there in your region, but in most regions you will find this AI feature. Try this out; it's worth the while. In the coming days, your pair programmer will be AI, and it's increasingly true. Though there are people who go against it. So once again, wishing you all the very best and see you in the next session. Thanks again.